All right, let's dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I know a lot of you are already familiar with Kiyosaki's work, but I'm thinking even those who've read it a bunch of times will find something new in our chat today. We're going to break down those core ideas and dig into those stories that make it such a classic, even after all these years.
It's wild how much debate this book still causes. It's not just about managing your money. It makes you think differently about work and success and what being rich really means.
Totally. Okay, for anyone who hasn't gotten around to it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is about Kiyosaki growing up with two dads who were total opposites when it came to money. His own dad, the poor dad, he struggled even with fancy degrees. And then there's his friend's dad, the rich dad, this entrepreneur who built himself up and had this whole other way of thinking about money.
Yeah, and comparing those two mindsets is what makes Kiyosaki's argument so strong. It's not just about earning, it's about knowing how money works and using that knowledge to build something that lasts.
Right. So let's get into those mindsets a little more. Kiyosaki's poor dad was all about the usual path: good education, stable job, work your way up. But Rich Dad was different. He was about starting businesses, taking risks, and building things that made money on their own.
And that difference is super clear when they talk about owning a home. Poor Dad saw a house as security, like you made it, the American dream. But Rich Dad, he saw it as a liability, especially if it sucked up all your cash and stopped you from doing other things.
Yeah, that's the whole your house isn't an asset thing. It blew my mind when I first read it. It flips everything we're usually taught on its head.
But Kiyosaki makes a good point. He says, a house is only an asset if it's making money, like renting it out.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the biggest lessons in the book. The rich don't work for money, money works for them. Kiyosaki tells a story about working for his rich dad as a kid for like 10 cents an hour. 10 cents an hour. Oof, that's rough even back then. I remember that story. Little Kiyosaki thought he'd be learning some secret money-making trick. But instead, he got a lesson in the difference between trading your time for money and building things that generate income.
Right, that's where the asset column comes in. Rich Dad taught Kiyosaki to focus on getting things that put money in his pocket, like businesses or real estate. It was the opposite of Poor Dad's idea of working hard to climb the corporate ladder. That system can trap you in what Kiyosaki calls the rat race.
And speaking of assets, there's that story about Ray Kroc, the McDonald's guy. When someone asked him what business he was in, he said the real estate business. It shows how powerful building an asset column can be, even for someone building a fast food empire.
Right. It's easy to think he just meant the actual McDonald's buildings. But I think there's more to it. Kroc knew that owning the land under each franchise gave him power and control. And that's a smart move anyone can learn from.
So we've got these different mindsets, the idea of building assets and making money work for you. But Kiyosaki also gets into some controversial stuff, like taxes and corporations.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Kiyosaki thinks the tax system, which was supposed to tax the rich, actually ends up hitting the middle class harder. He explains that wealthy people use corporations and other legal things to protect their stuff and pay less taxes.
I could see why that would cause some arguments. It goes against what we usually think about who benefits from the system and who pays the most.
Exactly. And whether or not you agree with Kiyosaki, it's a conversation worth having, especially with how complicated money is today. Understanding these ideas can help people make better choices about their own finances.
Okay, so Rich Dad, Poor Dad is more than just money tips. It digs into bigger issues and makes us question what we believe. But let's talk about taking action. Kiyosaki also talks about how the rich invent money, meaning they find ways to make money even when the economy is bad.
Totally. He gives the example of buying houses at foreclosure auctions for super cheap and then selling them quickly. It's not about getting rich fast. It's about understanding the market, finding opportunities, and taking smart risks.
But let's be real. Not every investment is a winner. Kiyosaki is honest about the challenges people face when they're trying to become financially free. He talks about fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and even being arrogant.
Right. And the great thing is he doesn't just list them, he offers ways to overcome them. He says to use fear as motivation, to see every failure as a chance to learn, and to always be looking for new knowledge and perspectives.
It's all about getting in the right mindset, developing those mental habits that help you deal with the ups and downs of money. So we covered a lot, getting the basics of Kiyosaki's ideas. But where do we go from here? How do we use these ideas in our own lives?
That's exactly what we're going to get into next. We'll dive into Kiyosaki's specific steps for getting on the path to financial freedom and talk about how to make these ideas work for you, whatever your situation and goals are. Okay, so we've talked about some of the main points from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like ditching the usual path, getting assets, and that rich dad way of thinking. Now, let's get practical. What are the actual steps Kiyosaki lays out for starting on the road to financial freedom?
Yeah, let's get into it. Kiyosaki's good at the big picture stuff, but his practical advice is what I find most useful, especially for those of us who aren't like real estate tycoons or anything. So
Yeah.
where does he say to start?
He's big on starting small. You don't need tons of money to start building assets. In fact, starting with smaller investments helps you learn, make mistakes, figure out what works without risking it all.
Right, it makes sense, like dipping your toes in the water before jumping in the deep end. Get comfortable, build your skills and confidence.
Exactly. And Kiyosaki really pushes finding mentors and advisors along the way. He says you don't have to figure everything out yourself. Learn from people who are already successful.
Oh yeah, that's so important. It's like having a guide in the financial world. Someone to show you the ropes and help you avoid the traps.
Yeah. And he warns about thinking you need to know everything before you start. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you in certain areas, like financial advisors, lawyers, accountants. Build a team of experts to support you.
That's a great point. You don't have to be a master of everything to build a good financial portfolio.
Now, one of the most basic things Kiyosaki says to do is pay yourself first. And it's not just saving money, it's choosing to invest in your future before paying for anything else.
That sounds simple, but I bet it's a big change for a lot of people. It's like putting your long-term goals ahead of instant gratification, right?
Exactly. It's about realizing that your future self is just as important as your present self, maybe even more important. Kiyosaki says that by regularly putting aside some of your income for investing, even if it's not much, you start to change your financial path.
He also talks about mastering a financial formula. What does he mean by that?
He believes everyone should find a specific financial strategy that works for them, something they enjoy and are willing to put effort into learning. It would be real estate, starting an online business, or even just dividend investing.
I see a theme here. It's about taking control, being proactive, not just waiting for success to happen.
Exactly. And once you've mastered that formula, Kiyosaki says to move on to a new one. He's all about expanding your financial skills, learning new strategies, adapting to changes in the market.
That's smart. In the financial world, getting too comfortable can be dangerous.
Right. Now, one of the most interesting concepts from Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the Indian giver idea.
Oh yeah, that one sticks with you. I love that analogy. It gets right to the core of how Kiyosaki thinks about investing. Can you remind everyone what it means?
Basically, it's about setting up your investments so you get something for free. Kiyosaki talks about buying a rental property where the tenant's rent eventually covers your mortgage, so you end up with free equity.
That's a perfect example. It's making your money work for you, creating passive income that keeps coming in.
And the Indian giver idea can be used for other investments too, not just real estate, like investing in a business that pays dividends or creating something that makes recurring revenue. It's about finding those opportunities where your initial investment keeps giving back.
It's a really cool concept. But like we said before, not every investment is a guaranteed win. Kiyosaki knows that people face obstacles, those mental things that can stop us from reaching financial freedom.
Yeah. And he's really good at explaining those obstacles. He talks about fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and even arrogance. He even says that sometimes those negative experiences, those failures, can be your best teachers.
Let's talk about those a bit. Fear is a big one, especially when it comes to money. What does Kiyosaki say about getting over that?
He says that fear, especially the fear of losing money, usually comes from not knowing enough about finances. The more you understand about money, the less scary it is.
So it's not about getting rid of fear completely. It's about managing it with education and knowledge.
Exactly. And he also says that fear can actually push you to do better. It can make you learn, take action, and protect your assets. He wants people to use that fear as motivation to improve their financial situation.
What about cynicism? I can see that being a problem, especially if you're around people who complain about money all the time or don't believe in achieving financial freedom.
Cynicism can spread like a disease. It can really affect your outlook. Kiyosaki says it's crucial to surround yourself with positive, supportive people, people who believe in you and are also on their own path to financial growth.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If you want to be successful with money, it makes sense to be around people who are already doing well, or at least working towards it.
Absolutely. And he also stresses building good financial habits, like paying yourself first, budgeting, and tracking your spending. These habits, once they become routine, can make a huge difference.
What about laziness? We all deal with that sometimes. But when it comes to money, it can be really bad.
Kiyosaki is pretty straight up about that. He says laziness is often disguised as being busy. We tell ourselves we don't have time to learn about money or manage our finances, but it's often just an excuse not to take responsibility.
He challenges readers to ask themselves, do I really not have time, or am I just avoiding something I don't want to do?
Right. And then there's arrogance, which can be tricky because it looks like confidence.
Yeah, it's that I already know everything attitude. It stops you from learning and growing.
Kiyosaki says that being truly intelligent means being open to new ideas and being able to say, I don't know, when you don't know something. He wants people to always be learning, especially about money, because things are always changing.
And he makes a good point about surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you in certain areas, building a team of advisors and mentors who can give you expert advice. That can help you avoid making big mistakes and make better decisions.
So we've talked about some of the main obstacles to financial freedom and how to overcome them. We've covered starting small, finding mentors, paying yourself first, mastering a financial formula, and becoming an Indian giver.
It's a lot to think about,
Yeah.
but I'm feeling inspired. Rich Dad, Poor Dad has a way of shaking things up, challenging those limiting beliefs, and making you see new possibilities.
Yeah.
So what are some final takeaways for our listeners? We've talked about so much from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, different mindsets, practical steps. But what's really hitting home for me is this idea of empowerment. Kiyosaki doesn't just tell you what to do. He wants you to think differently about money and take charge of your financial future.
Right, that's what makes this book so powerful. Even if you don't agree with every single thing Kiyosaki says, it's about changing your perspective, challenging those old beliefs that might be holding you back, and realizing you have more control than you think.
Yeah, it's like he gives you this toolbox
Hmm.
full of different tools and methods,
Yeah.
and you get to choose which ones to use and how to use them for your own situation.
And that's where the real work starts. Reading the book is just the beginning. The real change happens when you start using those ideas, experimenting, adjusting, finding what works for you.
And he's definitely not promising you'll get rich quick. He makes it clear that building wealth takes time and effort, and being willing to learn from your mistakes.
That's something I really like about the book. He's honest about the challenges. There will be setbacks, obstacles, times you'll want to quit. But he says the people who keep going, the ones who keep learning and adapting, are the ones who succeed in the end.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired and ready to go, what are some concrete steps they can take right now to use these ideas?
Well, I'd say the first thing is to figure out where you stand financially. Where are you at now? What are your goals? What are you good at? And what do you need to work on? Once you know that, you can start making a plan.
And that plan could be finding a mentor, learning about different investments, or even just starting to track your spending better.
Exactly. And remember, even small changes can add up over time. It's not about making huge changes overnight. It's about building those good financial habits that will make a difference in the long run.
Kiyosaki talks about the power of compounding, both with investments and with knowledge. The more you learn, the more you grow, and the more opportunities you'll have.
It's like a snowball rolling downhill. It starts small, but the momentum builds. And before you know it, you're making real progress towards your goals.
I think it's also important to remember that learning about money never stops. There's always more to learn, new strategies to try, and the market is always changing.
Oh, absolutely. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a great place to start, but it's just the beginning. The key is to stay curious, stay informed, and never stop looking for new knowledge and perspectives.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what's the one big thing you hope our listeners take away from all this?
I'd say it's this. You have the power to create your own financial future. It starts with taking ownership, educating yourself, and doing something about it. Don't be afraid to question what everyone else says, to think differently, and to define success on your own terms.
That's a great way to put it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad reminds us that financial freedom is possible. But it takes being willing to get out of your comfort zone, to keep learning throughout your life, and to never stop working towards a better financial future.
And remember, the journey itself can be just as rewarding as the destination. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the wins, and never underestimate the power of knowledge and action.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something valuable and are feeling inspired to take control of your financial journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.